I never thought moving into Maplewood Estates would feel like stepping into enemy territory. On paper, it was perfect, a quiet, gated community with tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed hedges, and houses that looked like they were copied straight from a suburban dream. A fresh start for me and my son, Elijah. After years of struggling as a single mother, I had finally saved enough to buy a modest home in this so-called family-friendly neighborhood. I should have known better. From the moment we moved in, the stares began. Lingering, judgmental, dissecting. A black woman with a disabled son, daring to exist in a place like this? It was as if we had crashed a private party. Elijah, my 10-year-old, didn't seem to notice, too busy exploring the house in his wheelchair, excited about the wide doorways and ramps I had installed. He was born with cerebral palsy, but that never dulled his spirit. If anything, he was the strongest person I knew. "Mom, can I go outside?" he asked one afternoon, wheeling up to me with hopeful eyes. I hesitated. We'd only been here a week, and already, the air felt thick with unspoken tension. But I refused to let my fear dictate his freedom. "Of course, baby," I said, forcing a smile. "Just stay close." He rolled down the driveway, humming a tune, while I sat on the porch, sipping iced tea. The sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. It should have felt peaceful. Then I saw her. A woman, thin-lipped, sharp-eyed, and radiating disapproval, standing across the street. Arms crossed, phone in hand, she whispered something to a man beside her. They both glanced at Elijah, then at me. Something wasn't right. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe they were just nosy neighbors. But then, 2 days later, a letter arrived. A neatly typed notice from the Maplewood Estates HOA. "Your home does not comply with community aesthetic standards. The wheelchair ramp at your front entrance must be removed immediately." My stomach dropped. I reread the words, disbelief turning to anger. This was my house.
My son needed that ramp.
They couldn't just. Before I could process it, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A clipped, authoritative voice greeted me. "Ms. Carter, this is Karen Ellison, the HOA president. We need to discuss the violations on your property. Immediately." I clenched my jaw. It had begun. The next morning, I stepped outside to find Karen Ellison standing at the edge of my driveway, flanked by 2 other HOA board members, an older man with graying hair and a woman in expensive athleisure. Karen was exactly as I imagined, blonde, middle-aged, with a face that looked permanently displeased. She held a clipboard like it was a weapon, her manicured nails tapping against the plastic. "Miss Carter," she said, eyes scanning me like I was trespassing on my own property. "We need to talk about your ramp." I crossed my arms. "There's nothing to talk about. My son needs it." She pursed her lips. "I understand, but Maplewood Estates has strict aesthetic guidelines. Homes must maintain a uniform appearance, and that," she waved dismissively at the ramp, "is an eyesore. We have rules for a reason." I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice even. "That ramp is a necessity, not a decoration. It's protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act." Her expression didn't change. "Well, this is private property, and our HOA regulations override certain." "No, they don't." I cut in. "Federal law trumps HOA rules." A flicker of irritation crossed her face. The man beside her, Mr. Pierce, adjusted his glasses. "We'll have to look into that," he said, though his tone made it clear he didn't care about the law. Only control. The woman, Lisa, fake smiled. "We just want to maintain property values. I'm sure you understand." Property values. Code for "we don't want your kind here." My hands curled into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Are we done here?" Karen's lips thinned.
For now.
"But you'll be hearing from us." I shut the door in their faces. That night, the unease settled deeper. I noticed things. Small but telling. Neighbors who used to nod in passing now turned away. A couple across the street whispered behind their hands when I rolled Elijah to the mailbox. And then the letters started. Slipped under my door. No return address. No signature. You don't belong here. Move before things get difficult. People like you bring trouble. Each note sent a fresh chill down my spine. I wanted to believe it was just some bitter old neighbor. Some coward too scared to confront me outright. But then Elijah came inside one evening, visibly shaken. "Mom," he whispered, eyes wide. "Some lady told me we should leave before something bad happens." I knelt beside him, heart hammering. What did she look like? His lip trembled. She had short blonde hair. She looked mad.
Karen.
A cold fury settled in my chest. This wasn't just about the ramp. This was about us. And I had a sick feeling it was only going to get worse. The next morning, I marched straight to the Maplewood Estates HOA office. Karen had made this personal, and I was done playing defense. The office was a pristine little building near the community center, white walls, navy blue trim, a perfect replica of the houses it governed. I pushed through the glass doors, heat simmering under my skin. A receptionist, a younger woman with stiff blonde curls, barely looked up. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak with Karen Ellison." She let out a practiced sigh, the kind that said, "I already know you're going to be a problem." "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need one." Before she could protest, Karen's voice cut through the air. "It's fine, Maddie." I turned to find her standing in the hallway, arms crossed, that same smug expression on her face. Like she'd been expecting me. I followed her into her office, slamming the door behind me. "You sent those letters," I said, cutting straight to the point. Karen's brows lifted in mock surprise. "Excuse me? You've been harassing me and my son since the day we moved in." My hands tightened into fists. The ramp. The warnings. The letters. And now you're sending threats directly to my child. She leaned back in her chair, fingers tapping against the desk. "I don't know what you're talking about. Liar." Her lips curled. "Miss Carter, I think you're confused. We enforce the rules fairly, for everyone. If you're having issues, maybe this just isn't the right neighborhood for you." There it was. That thinly veiled way of saying, "You don't belong here." I gritted my teeth. The ADA protects my son's right to accessibility. Your rules don't override federal law. Karen sighed, shaking her head. This isn't about the law. It's about community standards. If we start making exceptions for one person, soon enough, people will start changing their homes however they please. And then where would we be? Following the law, I shot back. And showing basic human decency. She waved a hand dismissively. "You can file a complaint, but I wouldn't waste your time. The board already voted unanimously to have the ramp removed. You have 2 weeks." I stared at her. "You're going to have to forcibly remove it, and I will sue you into the ground." Karen's smile didn't waver. "Then I guess we'll see you in court." That night, I started gathering evidence. I made copies of the letters, each threat more blatant than the last. I took pictures of the ramp, printed out the exact ADA statutes that protected Elijah's rights. But it wasn't enough. I needed something solid. Then I remembered something. Security cameras. When I moved in, I installed a small camera above the garage just in case. I had almost forgotten about it, but now it might be my best weapon. I scrolled through the footage, my pulse pounding. Then there. A grainy clip from 2 nights ago. A figure creeping up to my porch, slipping a letter under the door. I zoomed in. Blonde hair. A familiar stiff posture.
Karen.
My blood went cold. This was harassment. I backed up the footage, saved it to multiple drives. I had proof now. But before I could decide my next move, a loud bang startled me. I turned to the window, and my stomach dropped. A tow truck.
Parked in my driveway.
Hooking up my car. I bolted outside. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" A man in a navy uniform barely looked at me. "Vehicle violation. Ordered by the HOA." I spun, and of course there she was.
Karen.
Standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching with that same smug smile. "You can't do this," I shouted. She feigned sympathy. "Your car was improperly parked. Rules are rules, Miss Carter."
Lies.
I always parked in my driveway. But it wasn't about the car. It was about control.
Power.
Intimidation. The tow truck pulled away. My only vehicle.
Gone.
Karen turned to leave, but I called after her. "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice calm despite the rage burning inside me. She glanced back, smirking. "We'll see about that." Oh, we would.
Because now?
I wasn't just fighting back. I was going to destroy her. The next morning, I walked straight into the Maplewood Estates HOA meeting. The community center was packed. Neighbors filled the rows of folding chairs, murmuring amongst themselves. At the front of the room, Karen sat at a long table beside the other board members, queen of her domain. She looked up, saw me, and smirked. I felt the weight of every stare as I stepped forward.
Good.
Let them watch. Karen tapped her microphone. "Miss Carter, if you're here to discuss your ramp, I'm afraid we've already." I cut her off. "Oh, I'm not here to discuss the ramp. I'm here to talk about you." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Karen's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" I held up a stack of papers. "These are the letters I've received since moving in."
Threats.
Harassment. Telling me and my son to leave before something bad happens. I turned to face the crowd. Anyone else here been threatened by the HOA? Anyone else been mysteriously fined or had their car towed? Silence. Then a hand went up. An older man near the back. "I got a letter last year after I put up a basketball hoop for my grandson." A woman stood. "My car got towed for blocking the sidewalk when it wasn't even touching it." More hands. More voices. Karen's expression twisted. "This meeting is not about—" "Actually, it is," I interrupted. I turned to the board members beside her. "Did you know Karen's been sending these letters?" "Personally?" Mr. Pierce frowned. "That's a serious accusation." "Good thing I have proof." I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the projector. The screen flickered. The security camera footage played. A figure, walking up to my house, slipping a letter under my door. Then a close-up. Blonde hair. Karen's face. The room exploded.
Gasps.
Murmurs. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Karen shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous," she spat, but I wasn't done. I clicked again. Another video. Karen, standing outside my house, talking to the tow truck driver. Giving the order. "Care to explain that?" I asked, tilting my head. Her face went pale. "That's not. I was just enforcing the rules." I folded my arms. "You weren't enforcing the rules. You were trying to get rid of me and my disabled son." Mr. Pierce adjusted his glasses, looking at her sharply. "Karen, is this true?" She scoffed, eyes darting around. "Oh, come on. This woman is making a scene over some stupid letters. I was just trying to maintain standards. By threatening a child?" I shot back. Silence. Then a new voice. "You also targeted my mother." I turned. A tall black man stood near the entrance, arms crossed. His expression was stone cold. Karen's face drained of color. Because that man was Detective Marcus Reynolds. And he was an investigator for the Civil Rights Division. The room was dead silent. Karen's face was frozen in shock, her mouth slightly open like a fish gasping for air. Detective Marcus Reynolds stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He wasn't just any authority figure. He was a federal investigator specializing in civil rights violations. He turned to the board. "My mother was harassed by this HOA when she moved in last year. I started looking into Maplewood Estates months ago." His gaze settled on Karen. "And imagine my surprise when I found out you were pulling the same tactics again." Karen blanched. "This is absurd. I was only enforcing community rules." "By sending anonymous threats." I cut in. "By ordering my car towed?" "By intimidating my disabled child." More gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." Karen's fingers clenched around the edge of the table. This is a setup," she snapped, voice rising. "She's lying. That video proves nothing." Marcus arched an eyebrow. "You want more proof?" He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick file. Karen's breath hitched. "I've collected multiple complaints against you," Marcus continued. "Unlawful fines. targeted harassment, even a case where you tried to evict a disabled veteran. He let the papers fall onto the table. You've been running this HOA like a personal kingdom. Sweat beaded on Karen's forehead. She was unraveling. This is outrageous, she shrieked, looking wildly at the other board members. You believe this nonsense? We've been keeping this neighborhood in order. Mr. Pierce cleared his throat. Karen, I had no idea. You had no idea, because I was doing your job, she snapped. These people don't belong here. They bring property values down, She stopped. Too late. The room went deathly still. Every pair of eyes locked onto her. Her mask had slipped.
And now?
Everyone saw her for what she was. A woman near the front stood. I moved here 5 years ago. I always thought it was odd how you lost my paperwork 3 times before approving me. A Latino man rose beside her. I got fined for parking my truck in my own driveway, even though my white neighbor had the same model. Murmurs turned into accusations. Karen's head whipped around. You don't know what you're talking about. But no one was listening. Marcus nodded to 2 officers standing by the door. Ms. Ellison, we have enough evidence to move forward with an official investigation into civil rights violations and discrimination. You're coming with us. Karen screeched. This is a witch hunt. I built this community. You can't do this to me. The officers grabbed her arms, but she thrashed wildly. I'll sue. Then, her eyes landed on me. Her expression contorted into pure hatred. You did this, she hissed. You ruined everything. I held her gaze. No, Karen, I said quietly. You did. And then, the officers dragged her out the door. The Queen had fallen. Section 6. Justice and Resolution. The fallout was swift and brutal. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from Karen, but the damage was done. The entire neighborhood knew the truth. Marcus's investigation uncovered years of racial discrimination, fraudulent fines, and illegal threats. The DOJ stepped in. The HOA faced a massive lawsuit. Karen? She was charged with multiple counts of harassment and discrimination. Between legal fees and fines, she lost everything. Her house was foreclosed. She tried to fight back, tried to sue, but no judge wanted to hear her case. She disappeared after that. Some said she moved to a rundown apartment outside town. Others said she skipped the state. I didn't care, because Maplewood Estates was finally changing. The new HOA leadership wiped every unlawful fine. They reached out to the people Karen had driven away, inviting them back. Neighbors who once turned their backs now approached me with apologies. Elijah's ramp? Untouched. One evening, as I watched him roll down the driveway, laughing, Marcus stood beside me. You did good, he said. I exhaled. So did you. We stood there for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky. Then he smirked. You ever thought about joining the HOA? I laughed. One tyrant at a time, Marcus. The news spread fast. Within hours, Maplewood Estates' HOA scandal was everywhere. Local stations ran headlines like Discrimination in the Suburbs, HOA President Arrested for Civil Rights Violations. The footage of Karen being dragged out, screaming, played on repeat. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board collapsed. Members resigned in disgrace, desperate to avoid being sued into oblivion. But it was too late. The Department of Justice had launched a full investigation. Lawsuits piled up. Families who had been forced out came forward with testimonies and evidence. Karen's world crumbled. Her arrest was just the beginning. Investigators found forged fines, missing payments, and fraudulent charges. Turns out, she wasn't just racist, she was a thief. A full audit revealed hundreds of thousands of dollars in misused HOA funds. She lost everything. Her home? Sold to pay off legal fees. Her position? Stripped. Her reputation? Destroyed. Even her so-called friends abandoned her. The same people who cheered her on at HOA meetings now pretended they never knew her. And the best part? She tried to fight back. Filed a lawsuit against me for defamation. The judge laughed her out of court. A new beginning. With Karen gone, the neighborhood changed. The new HOA, desperate to make amends, wiped out the unfair fines. They personally apologized to every homeowner Karen had targeted. Policies were rewritten. And for the first time in years, Maplewood Estates felt like a community again. One morning, I stepped outside with Elijah. His ramp was still there, untouched. He grinned at me. "Race you to the park, Mom." I watched as he rolled ahead, his laughter light and free. And for the first time since moving here, I felt at home. Later that evening, as I sat on my porch, Detective Marcus Reynolds walked up the driveway. "Thought you might like to see this." He handed me a document. I scanned it, and my breath hitched. It was an official settlement. Karen had been ordered to pay restitution to every family she had harassed. I looked up at Marcus, stunned. He smirked. "Guess she won't be bothering anyone anytime soon." I exhaled. "You know, when I moved here, I thought this neighborhood would never change." Marcus leaned against the railing. "People only stay silent until they realize they're not alone." He nodded toward the houses around us. "Look at them now." I followed his gaze. Neighbors who once ignored me now waved. Families sat outside, talking, laughing, free from fear. Marcus smirked. "Ever think about joining the HOA?" I laughed. "One tyrant at a time, Marcus." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, if you ever change your mind." As he walked away, I looked back at Elijah, playing with the kids down the street. We had won. And Karen? She was just a bad memory.